The Adventures of Dora Bell, Private Detective, by Elizabeth Burgoyne Corbett, Madame Duchesne's garden party. It cost more than £200, Miss Bell. But that is not the worst of the matter. My aunt stipulated that I should always wear it as a perpetual reminder of her past kindness and her future good intentions, and if she misses it, I shall lose favour with her altogether. To lose Miss Mainwaring's favour means to lose the splendid fortune which is hers to bequeath. So you see how very serious the matter is for me. It is indeed little short of life and death, for poverty would kill me now. For God's sake, do your best for me. But surely, if Miss Mainwaring knows that you could not possibly have foreseen your loss, she will not be unjust enough to disinherit you? Indeed she will. She believes me to be vacillating and unreliable, because I broke off an engagement with a rich man to whom I had but given a reluctant acceptance, and united myself to the man of my choice. My husband was poor and therefore beyond the pale of forgiveness, and my own pardon is only based on the most unswerving obedience to all my aunt's injunctions. The pendant came from India, and the stones in it are said to possess occult power. I wish they had the power to come back to their rightful owner. The speaker heaved a sigh of desperation as she spoke, and I glanced at her with considerable interest. She was tall, pale, dark-eyed, and handsome, but her appearance bore certain signs of that vacillation and carelessness of which her aunt accredited her with the possession. The circumstances surrounding the loss of which she complained were peculiar. She had been spending the evening at the house of the German ambassador, and was returning home in Miss Mainwaring's carriage, when she became aware of the fact that she had lost the jewelled pendant which her aunt had given her as a token of reconciliation when she returned to her after being suddenly widowed. A frantic search of the carriage bore no results, and Mrs. Bevan hastily told the coachman to return to the embassy, but she prudently refrained from confiding the particulars of her loss to him, for she was not quite without hope that it might be remedied. Madame von Auerbach was, however, able to give her no comfort, for she had herself suffered in like manner with her guest. She had lost a valuable diamond-studded watch, and when the most careful search failed to discover it, the conclusion arrived at was that some thief must have been present at the reception. It was an unpleasant conclusion to arrive at, but it was the only natural one. For the ambassador's wife had not left her guests, or gone beyond the reception rooms from the time she entered them, wearing the watch, to the moment when, the last visitors having just gone, she thought of looking at her watch and found that it had disappeared. Mrs. Bevan's return a few moments later with the news that her pendant had disappeared confirmed the supposition that some professional thief must have been at work, and the police were at once communicated with. They were also strictly enjoined to keep the matter a profound secret, for various reasons. But Mrs. Bevan was too anxious to rely entirely upon the exertions of the regular force, hence her application to our firm and her urgent entreaty that I would act with the utmost dispatch. Soon after my client's departure, I sought an interview with Madame von Auerbach, but could glean very little useful information. The invitations had been sent out with great care, but their exclusiveness was negatived by the fact that they were all sent to so-and-so and friend. The position of those invited by name had been considered sufficient guarantee of the perfect suitability of the friends whom they might select to accompany them to the embassy, and at least a score of people had been present of whom the hostess barely heard even their names. Of course, no one could treat any single one of these individuals as suspects without some definite suspicion to work upon, and unfortunately for our prospects of success, there was not the slightest ground for suspecting anyone in particular. I was about to quit Madame von Auerbach's house when a servant entered with a card upon a waiter, and upon hearing that the name inscribed thereon was that of one of the guests of the previous evening, I hastily decided to stay a little longer, and requested Madame von Auerbach to keep my vocation a secret from her visitor. The next minute, a most bewitching little woman was ushered into the room. "Oh, my dear Madame!" she exclaimed with a charming foreign accent. "Such an unfortunate thing. I lost my beautiful diamond clasp last night. Have your servants seen anything of it?" Madame von Auerbach turned pale, and I looked with augmented interest at the harbinger of this new development of the previous evening's mystery. The depredations had evidently been on a large scale, and the depredators had shown remarkably good taste in the choice of their spoil. The latest victim was a French lady named Madame Duchesne, and she waxed eloquent in lamentations over her loss when it was shown to her how little hope there was of recovering her diamond clasp. "And do you know, I feel so terribly upset," was her pathetic protest, "that I would give anything not to have had to go on with my own garden party tomorrow. And I don't like to say it, but it is a fact that I may also have included the thief in my invitation, and it would be awful if more things were to be stolen. Whatever shall I do?" As no practical advice seemed to be forthcoming, Madame Duchesne studied for a moment and then announced her intention of employing a detective. "Not a real, horrid policeman," she averred, "but one of those extraordinary individuals who seem able to look through and through you, and who can find anything out. Private detectives, I think they call them." Madame von Auerbach looked up eagerly, but I gave her a warning glance which caused her to postpone the revelation of my identity, which she had felt prompted to make. "Do you know any of these people?" was the Frenchwoman's appeal to me. "Can you help me to the address of one?" "There are several firms of private detectives in London, if we are to judge from their advertisements," I answered. "I have heard of Messrs. Bell and White, of Holborn, spoken of as fairly good, but of course there are plenty of others equally good, or probably better." "Bell and White, Holborn. Yes, I will try them. Thank you so much for helping me. May I ask if you live in London?" Seizing my cue, Madame von Auerbach promptly came to my assistance. "I am very angry with Miss Gresham," she averred. Since she resigned her post as governess to the Duke of Solothurn's children, she has hardly deigned to take any notice of the numerous friends she made in Germany, but I mean to make her stay a few days with me, now that she has come to see me. "Then you must bring her with you to my garden party," said Madame Duchesne, and the invitation so cleverly angled for was accepted with a faint pretence of hesitation at the idea of inflicting myself upon the hospitality of a total stranger. After Madame Duchesne's departure, I congratulated Madame von Auerbach very warmly upon her tact and presence of mind, and arranged to visit the garden party as her friend the next day. In due course, the interesting function was in full swing, and the fascinating hostess had quite a crowd of guests to look after. My guarantor had left me, at my own request, to my own devices. I wanted to look about me and to note all that was going on without being too much in evidence myself. Presently, Madame Duchesne approached me with a very mysterious air and introduced a very handsome man to my notice. "Don't be shocked," she whispered. "But this is the private detective, Mr. Bell. I communicated with him at once after leaving Madame von Auerbach's yesterday, and he is here to watch that no pickpocket secures booty here. Isn't it too dreadful to have to take such precautions? I will never give another party in London." I responded to this confidential communication with due sympathy, and gravely acknowledged the attention my new companion bestowed upon me for a few moments. And I had need of my gravity and presence of mind. For the man introduced to me was not my uncle, the detective. I knew that our firm had not been applied to by Madame Duchesne, in spite of her assertion to the contrary, and as this was certainly no one who had ever been in our office, I knew that certain suspicions that I had formed yesterday were likely to be verified. Since this stranger was certainly no detective, I concluded that he was merely posing as one for the sake of diverting suspicion from the Oenders whom I was anxious to run to earth. The assumption that he was the associate and helpmate of the thieves was also a very natural one, although a glance at the lovely hostess and her dainty surroundings almost seemed to belie such a supposition. But I knew that I was on the right track, and within the hour my vigilance was rewarded. The sham detective, whose pretended avocation had been disclosed to none but Madame von Auerbach and myself, sauntered from group to group, as if intent upon scrutinizing their actions. His real object was to attach their jewellery, and I had the satisfaction of seeing him possess himself of a costly watch, which Lady A was wearing in somewhat careless fashion. Instant denunciation was not my intention. I mean to probe the matter to the root, and followed Mr. Bell's movements with apparent nonchalance. Presently, he culled a couple of beautiful standard roses and handed them to Madame Duchesne with a graceful compliment. The thing was beautifully done, and none but a person keenly on guard would have noticed that the watch changed hands with the roses. This little comedy over, Madame sauntered towards the house, and 5 minutes later I came upon her, quite by accident, of course, just as she was relocking a dainty cabinet from which she had taken a fresh bottle of perfume, in the use of which she was very lavish. There were 2 or 3 other people in Madame's charming boudoir, among them being Madame von Auerbach, by whose side I seated myself with an air of sudden weakness. She was really startled by the development of events, but she had been previously cautioned and played her part very well indeed when I exclaimed that I felt dreadfully ill. "What shall I do?" she cried. "I hope it is not one of your old attacks." "Yes, it is," I whispered faintly. "Do send for my uncle. He is the only one who can help me." I was promptly placed on the couch and dosed with all sorts of amateur remedies, pending the arrival of my uncle, who had been sent for in hot haste, and who, entre nous, was waiting with a police officer in private clothes for the expected urgent summons. No sooner did they appear than my indisposition vanished, and I astonished the bystanders by springing vigorously to my feet. "Arrest Madame Duchesne," I cried, "and her accomplice." Pointing to the latter, I continued, "That man has stolen Lady A's watch, and it is locked in that cabinet." What a scene of confusion there was immediately! Not only Lady A, but several other people discovered that they had been robbed, and the cabinet was found to contain a great quantity of stolen valuables, among them being Mrs. Bevan's much-prized pendant. My discovery was only made in the nick of time. In another 12 hours the birds would have flown, for the real Madame Duchesne, the lady from whom they had stolen the letters of introduction which had obtained them the entrée to London. Society had arrived in London that day. An accomplice had warned them of the fact, and as they knew that this garden party they were giving at the gorgeous house they had hired would be their last opportunity for some time, they had determined to make a large haul and decamp that same evening. Luckily for many people, I was able to frustrate their intention. At present they are lodging in infinitely less luxurious quarters, and several members of the upper classes are much more careful than formerly as to whom they associate with by virtue of letters of introduction. This is Lynn Pryor Audio. We are thrilled you're here. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, and hit the subscribe button. Your support helps us create more of the content you love. We appreciate every one of you. Remember to comment and let us know how we are doing. Go through our playlists for more mysteries from Lynn Pryor Audio. Thank you one and all.